This morning, on the 6th of May, encampment-style protests began also here in Cambridge and at Oxford. Now, there have been protests ongoing in the UK for some time. There have been some very large protests in London that haven't always been student-focused. I've also seen protests at the LSE, heard about protests at SOAS, and I know that there are protests that have happened elsewhere around the country. But it does seem as though today's action increases the prominence of this particular kind of protest in a manner that is similar to what's been going on in the United States over the last couple of months. Now, what will be interesting is to see how the British protests differ from the American protests that they're in some ways similar to. So, anecdotally, I did observe part of the Cambridge protest today, and what was clear were a couple of differences from a lot of what's happened in the US. First of all, because there isn't really a campus city distinction in the same way that there often is in the United States, the protest, almost by definition, was right out in the street. It ended up blocking part of an important street in the center of the city. Um, there was really no way to differentiate campus from city. Therefore, if there were to be action to contain or to repress the protest, it would be only natural that that would come from the police, rather than from some kind of internal authority. Wouldn't have to be that the police would be invited into a separate campus. That being said, though, as far as I could tell today, there were no police anywhere near the demonstration, nor was there any kind of serious disruption to the point where any sort of police action would have been necessary or useful, at least in the moment that I saw of that demonstration. So, at least for right now, the demonstration was relatively large, a couple of hundred people there, which is large for Cambridge. From what I understand, similar scale at Oxford. But at least for right now, the mood seemed fairly calm. The university did not seem immediately poised to respond in any way. The protesters were definitely mobilizing this whole theme of claims specifically directed around divestment and divestment from companies that were linked in some way to providing equipment that's being used by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza. That was at least what was being articulated today at this protest. What was also notable, and I think different from some of the American protests, is that there was a clear presence of faculty, and at least one or two speakers who identified themselves as faculty and also as members of the union, the UCU, that represents university and college academics in the UK. The union has at points also taken explicit political stances that are more or less sympathetic, I would say, to what these protests seem to be about. And that stance has sometimes been controversial inside the union, but it has been a fairly consistent line. That's a different context, I think, from the United States. There has been some faculty support for demonstrations. There's also been some opposition, but there isn't a union, and at least in most places, and there isn't a national union certainly that has taken a sympathetic stance, and that members of which are participating as union members or identifying themselves at least as union members, and citing the union in their support of the protest. There didn't seem to be any sort of counter protest, at least for now. So what remains to be seen is how will this play out differently. I think that the support of faculty and of the union at the national and local level may mean that it plays differently. I think that the response of the authorities is quite different, in that a protest of this size anywhere in the United States would certainly have sparked some kind of police presence, not necessarily response, but presence, whereas here there didn't seem to be any, at least uniformed police present at all. And I think another aspect of this is that we're at a different stage in the protest cycle. This is just really getting started to a much greater extent than in the United States. Now, yes, as I said at the beginning, there have been ongoing protests at a number of universities, but they haven't been as high profile, and they haven't been of this specific sort consistently. Though I understand one or two of them have. But this, I think, does represent sort of an earlier move on the protest cycle compared to where a lot of places are in the United States. The other thing is that the academic calendar at many UK schools is quite different from that in the United States. So there's a lot of universities that are already essentially out of term completely, and others like Cambridge and Oxford that are in sort of the third term of the year, which is a mostly non-teaching term, but in which exams will come within a few weeks, sort of at the very end of May, beginning of June. We'll see the start of exams. And so there's a longer time horizon for universities to have to wait out any protests like this. So we'll see if they wait them out or if they engage with them in different ways and how the protesters respond and what the protesters do. At least for now, though, it seems as though the mood is calmer and less tense here than it seems to have been at many US campuses recently. And again, notably, the key differences would be the phase in the protest cycle, the relative absence of any kind of police presence, let alone police response, and the fact that there was a strong contingent of faculty support, or at least self-proclaimed faculty support, and some links at least invoked to the faculty union. All of that makes this potentially different from the situation in the US, and I think if anything, if I had to predict, it's more likely that we'll see UK schools in something like the Berkeley style, not really doing much in response, rather than a strong repressive response, which I think is very unlikely. And I don't know about bargaining. Actually, one last difference is that in general, universities in the UK do not have the same kind of investment profile or endowments that US universities do. Even Cambridge and Oxford, which are certainly among the two wealthiest universities in the country, don't have anything like the endowments of their American counterparts. And so the degree to which many American universities can sometimes be viewed almost as fund managers with a university or fund management firms with a university attached, is much, much lower in the UK. And so arguments about investment and divestment and so on may carry less water. They may not, though. So it'll be very interesting to see how this evolves and the degree to which the UK and US protests move along similar or quite different trajectories. Thanks.